But now if we try to create another event, it's still not working. And it looks like we created another error. Let's dig deeper and click on the file name on the right to see what's going on. Oh, it looks like SaveEvent is calling that same calendar events method, which, as we know, will return null. And as the error reads, we can't call the push method on null. How might we confirm that this is actually what's going on though? Well, we're going to have to jump into the code and pause the code as it's executing so we can examine the state of the variables. One way we can do this is by clicking on the Pause on Exceptions icon in the bottom left. You see it down there? Once we have the pause icon pressed, the next time an error occurs, the code is going to be paused. While it's paused, we can just hover over each variable and it will show us the value. Here's the event object we're trying to add, which has a name of 5k run. The events variable is supposed to hold our events list, but as you can see, it's currently null as we suspected. Now if we refresh the browser again with Pause on Exceptions selected, something unexpected is going to happen. It looks like we paused somewhere inside of our jQuery library, and it looks like it's the minified version of jQuery, meaning that all whitespace and unneeded characters have been removed. Minifying your JavaScript libraries like this is going to make it load quicker in any browser, but it's also going to make it more difficult to debug. Fortunately, DevTools has a pretty print mode which can make it readable again. You see those brackets down there at the bottom? If we click that, our code becomes a lot more readable, and we can see that the code that's causing the exception is inside a try-catch block. This means it's a caught exception, which we're not going to want to pause on. This is why DevTools has a second mode for your debugger that will pause only on uncaught exceptions. All we have to do to activate it is click that button a second time. Now if we reload the page again and try to create an event again, you'll see it skips directly to our uncaught exception. This is what we wanted. That's twice now that we've had problems with the event function. So let's take a look inside that code and see if we can figure out what's going on. I'm going to scroll down to the function in the code and set a debugger breakpoint by clicking on the left margin on the first line of that function. Then, if I try to create an event again, the execution will pause as soon as it hits that breakpoint, like so. The line you see highlighted here hasn't actually been run yet. We can confirm this by hovering over the events variable. So we need to execute that code to see what happens. To do this, we'll need to use the execution controls you can see over on the right-hand side of the page. The first button you see here is Resume, which will resume the execution of the entire page until the next breakpoint, if there is one. The next button is Step Over. This will run the current line highlighted and step over to the next line of code. Then there's Step Into, which will go down into whatever function is being called on that line. In this case, it would be the getItem method. Step Out will return from the current function into its caller, and the last button will deactivate all breakpoints in our code. What we want to do here is execute the current line of code and step over to the next one. So I'm going to press the Step Over button. And now, if we hover over the events variable, we can see that it's been defined and it is in fact null. Remember earlier how we were checking to see if events that got returned is null? Well, this is probably a better place to check for it. So we'll check to see if events is null, and if it is, we'll parse the JSON. Otherwise, we'll just return an empty array. We can test our new code by simply refreshing the page, and once again, it will stop on our breakpoint. Now, if we step through a few lines, we can see that our events was equal to null, so we're going to return an empty array. Now, if we click Create New Event, it's going to pause on our breakpoint again. Then if we execute this line and hover over our events, we can see that it's still null, so it's going to return an empty array again, and we're going to add a new event to this array. And now, for the first time ever, we've actually added a new event successfully. And now that the event method is fixed, we can go back and remove that null check that we did in the last level from the getEventsForDate function. Why don't you give this a try in the challenges?